Angela Carter had $11 in her purse and a final notice in her mailbox. She gave the old man her dinner anyway. 12 hours later, 3 black cars stopped in front of her house, and the man who stepped out of the third one owned 800 restaurants. At 6:17 the next morning, 3 black sedans turned slowly onto Willow Street and stopped in front of the smallest house on the block. Angela stood behind the thin curtains of her living room, still wearing the faded blue robe she'd owned for almost 10 years. Beside her, her 13-year-old son Marcus stared through the glass with his mouth open. Men in dark coats stepped out of the first 2 cars. Then the rear door of the third sedan opened. An older man got out and stood straight beneath a pale winter sky. His gray hair had been combed. His shoes had been polished. His charcoal suit looked as though it had been cut for him by hand, in a room where somebody knelt on the floor with a tape measure and took his time. Angela knew that face. But less than 12 hours earlier, that same man had been sitting on a bench outside a roadside diner in a torn brown coat, shivering under a broken street lamp, with nowhere to go and nothing to eat. And Angela had given him the last meal she could afford. She had no idea he was Samuel Whitmore, one of the wealthiest men in America. She had no idea he'd come to her town looking for the truth. And she had no idea that before the sun went down, the thing he carried in his coat pocket would reach all the way back to her mother and change what happened to a few hundred people she had never met. The night before had started the way most winter nights started at the Bluebird Diner. The wind came across the empty fields west of Millbrook, Tennessee, carrying the smell of rain and cold ground. By 8:30, Main Street had gone quiet. The hardware store was dark. The barber shop had turned its chairs to the wall. Even the church bell seemed to ring smaller in that kind of air. Inside the diner, the yellow lights glowed above red vinyl booths that had been patched so many times the silver tape had become part of the design. Somebody's grandchild had scratched initials into the corner table sometime around 1986, and Earl Jenkins had never sanded them out. Angela moved between the tables with a coffee pot in one hand and a damp cloth in the other. She was 39 years old, though there were evenings when the tiredness made her feel a good deal older than that. Her dark hair was tied back. Her uniform was clean, but the white collar had begun to fray at the fold. She'd been on her feet since 6 that morning, first cleaning rooms at the Willow Creek Motor Lodge, then the evening shift here. She didn't complain. Complaining took energy, and Angela had learned a long time ago to save every ounce of it for the things that mattered. Her son mattered. Keeping a roof over him mattered. Making sure he never heard the landlord's last warning through a closed door, that mattered. The rest could wait. Marcus sat in the booth nearest the kitchen, working through his homework under the hanging lamp. He was a thoughtful boy, with his mother's steady eyes and his father's quiet smile. A pencil rested between his fingers while he studied a page of algebra. Every few minutes he looked up at Angela, not because he needed help, because he knew she was tired. At 13, Marcus had already learned to notice the things grown people try to hide. He noticed when his mother skipped supper. He noticed that she only turned the heat up after he'd gone to bed. He noticed when she opened the mailbox, read a letter, and folded it before he could see the red words printed across the top. Final notice. Past due. Payment required. Angela wished he noticed less. She wanted him worried about school dances and baseball scores and whether his sneakers looked worn out. She didn't want him doing arithmetic on the price of bread, or saying he wasn't hungry when there was only enough for one. At 9:15, the last customer left. Earl Jenkins, 74 years old, and the owner of the place since Johnson was president, turned the sign on the door from open to closed. Earl was a broad man with silver hair and big hands, shaped by 50 years of kitchen work. He'd known Angela's mother, Ruth, since the two of them were children running barefoot behind the feed store. He'd known Angela through the best and the worst parts of her life. He watched her graduate high school. He came to her wedding. He stood beside her at the cemetery after her husband David went in the space of a single season, when Marcus was 6 years old. And when Angela lost her job at Whitmore Family Restaurants 2 years back, Earl gave her evening work without asking a single question about it. He heard the whole story later. By then, he already knew he'd made the right call. Earl lifted the register drawer and started counting the day. Go on home, he told her. I can finish up. Angela wiped down the edge of the counter. You said that yesterday. And I meant it yesterday. You stayed till near midnight. I'm old. We don't need the sleep. Angela gave him a tired smile. That's not how being old works, Earl. It's how I've decided it works. Marcus closed his book and slid it into his backpack. Earl glanced at the boy, then reached under the counter and came up with a paper sack. Made too much meatloaf. Angela looked at the sack. You never make too much. First time for everything. Earl. Take it before I get offended. Angela knew exactly what he was doing. He knew she knew. That's how dignity survives between decent people. They give without making the other person say out loud that they needed anything. She took the sack. Thank you. There's mashed potatoes in there, green beans, 2 pieces of cornbread. You said meatloaf. I forgot about the rest. Angela set the sack down beside Marcus. They were nearly ready to go when the boy looked toward the front window. Mom? Angela followed his eyes. There was a man sitting on the bench outside the diner. At first, she could only make out his shape through the glass. His shoulders were bent forward. His hands hung down between his knees. A worn brown coat sat loose on him, the way a coat sits on a man who used to be bigger. The street lamp over the bench flickered twice and held. Earl came closer to the window. He wasn't there 10 minutes ago. Angela looked at the empty road. No bus came through Millbrook after 7 o'clock. The nearest shelter was almost 15 miles out, over the county line. The thermometer nailed to the porch post had already dropped below freezing. The man raised his head. Even through the window, Angela could see how tired he was. He looked to be somewhere in his early 70s. His beard was gray and uneven. There was dirt down one side of the coat. His shoes had cracked open along the seams. But something about him wasn't right, or rather, wasn't what she expected. He didn't look at the diner the way a hungry man looks at a diner. He looked at it with sorrow. The way a man looks at a house he used to live in. Earl reached for the lock. I'll tell him we're closed, but he can sit inside till we figure out where to put him. Angela opened the door before Earl got there. The cold hit her face all at once. Sir? The man looked up. His eyes were clear and steady and surprisingly gentle. I'm sorry, he said. I did not mean to cause any trouble. You're not causing trouble. I saw the lights. We just closed. I understand. He started to stand. His movements were slow, and one hand shook a little as he pushed off the bench. Angela stepped closer. You don't have to go anywhere. I will find somewhere else. There isn't anywhere else. Not tonight. The man looked down the silent street, at the dark hardware store and the shuttered barber shop, and the one traffic light blinking yellow over an empty intersection. I suppose that is true, he said. Angela saw that his sleeve was damp through. His fingers had gone pale. Come inside. He hesitated. I do not have any money. I didn't ask you if you had money. The man studied her face for a moment, longer than the words seemed to call for, as though she'd said something bigger than she meant to. Then he nodded. My name is Sam. I'm Angela. She held the door. Inside, Earl steered the stranger toward the booth nearest the heater. Marcus moved his backpack over without being asked. The man sat down and held his hands out toward the warm air. Earl poured him a cup of coffee. Cream? No, thank you. Sugar? No. Something to eat? The man looked toward the counter. I could not pay you. Earl opened his mouth, but Angela got there first. We've got food left over. Earl turned slightly toward her. Angela gave him a look he understood. The paper sack was not leftovers. The paper sack was supper, hers and Marcus's. Earl could have fixed something else, but Angela knew his stock was counted down to the case. The diner had barely covered the electric bill and the wages that week. He had already helped her more than he could afford, and had been doing it for 2 years without ever once letting it show. She picked up the sack from beside her son. Marcus looked at her. For one quiet second, neither of them said anything. Angela saw the hunger he was trying to hide. Marcus looked at the stranger's shaking hands. Then the boy pushed the sack the rest of the way toward his mother. We can split it, he said. Angela felt something tighten under her ribs. You need your dinner. So does he. The stranger turned toward Marcus. What is your name, son? Marcus. How old are you? 13. The man nodded slowly. 13 is old enough to understand a great many things. It is too young to carry the worries of grown people. Marcus glanced at his mother. I don't mind helping. I can see that. Angela opened the sack and divided the food onto 3 plates. She gave the largest portion to the stranger. The second largest went to Marcus. She kept a small piece of cornbread and 2 bites of meatloaf for herself. The man noticed. You should have more. I ate earlier. Marcus looked down at his plate and didn't say a word. The stranger's eyes moved from the boy to Angela and back. He understood the lie, but he didn't shame her by naming it. They ate quietly for a while. The man took his time, the way a person does when he hasn't had a home-cooked meal in longer than he'd care to admit. When he got to the cornbread, he closed his eyes for a second. My mother made cornbread like this, he said. Earl leaned back against the counter. Your mother knew what she was doing. She did. Where are you headed? Angela asked. The man looked down into his coffee. I am not entirely sure. You got family? A son. Does he know where you are? No. Is he looking for you? The man gave a faint, tired smile. I imagine several people are looking for me. Angela wondered for a moment if he'd wandered off from a care home somewhere, but his answers were too careful for that. His eyes were too clear. Do you have a safe place to sleep? I thought I did. What happened? The man wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. I spent most of my life building places where other people could sit down and eat. Tonight I wanted to see what happened when I walked into one of those places without a wallet. Earl's eyes narrowed. One of those places? The man didn't answer that directly. I learned more than I expected to. Angela waited. He looked toward the front window, where the wind was pressing dead leaves flat against the glass. 3 restaurants would not let me sit down. At the last one, a manager told me the customers did not want to look at somebody like me while they ate their supper. Earl shook his head. That manager ought to be ashamed of himself. He said he was following company policy. No decent company's got a policy against a cold old man sitting near a heater. The man looked at Earl for a long moment. You would be surprised what people will call policy when they do not want to call it what it is. Angela sat down across from him. Were they part of a chain? Yes. Which one? He studied her carefully before he answered. Whitmore Family Restaurants, 3 of our locations, between Franklin and here. Angela's hand stopped halfway to her coffee cup. Marcus saw his mother's face change. Mom, I'm fine. But she was not. 2 years had gone by since she last wore the green and gold Whitmore uniform. 2 years since she walked into a regional office believing somebody there would want to hear the truth. 2 years since a man behind a polished desk slid a termination form across the wood and explained to her, patiently, that loyalty was worth a good deal less than doing what she was told. The stranger noticed the silence. You know the company. I used to work for it. Why did you leave? I didn't leave. It came out sharper than she meant it to. Angela looked down at the table. I was let go. For what reason? Depends on who's telling it. I would like to hear your version. Angela almost laughed. People say they want the truth when what they actually want is a short answer, something they can nod at, feel bad about for a minute, and set down again on their way out the door. The truth is hardly ever short. Doesn't matter now. The man leaned back a little. It matters to you. I've got a job, my boy's healthy, we manage. Marcus looked at the almost empty plate in front of his mother. The man followed the boy's eyes. Managing is not always the same thing as living, he said. Angela's expression hardened. I don't need pity. That was not pity. Then what was it? Recognition. The diner went quiet. Earl reached up and switched off one row of ceiling lights, and the booths dropped into a softer glow. Angela thought about ending the conversation right there. She'd spent 2 years working to forget the whole business. She had no interest in unfolding it for a stranger who'd be gone by daylight. But maybe that was exactly why she finally started talking. He'd be gone by daylight. The story would go nowhere. "I worked at the Whitmore in Franklin," she said. "Started as a server after my husband passed. Made shift supervisor inside of 18 months. The man nodded. "That is fast. I worked hard." "I believe you. There was an older fella there named Lewis Grant, 68 years old. He'd washed dishes in that kitchen for damn near 15 years. She caught herself. "Sorry. 15 years. Earl already knew every word of this. He listened like he was hearing it new. "Lewis had arthritis in both hands," Angela went on. "He never asked for special treatment, not once. All he asked was not to be put on doubles 3 days running." "What happened?" "New regional director came in. Preston Whitmore had started changing the way the company measured things. Every restaurant was told to bring labor costs down." The man's eyes sharpened at the name. Angela saw it. She kept going. "Our manager started cutting staff. Fewer people doing more work. Lewis got put on closing shifts and then told to be back in before sunrise. Was that legal? Some of it. Some of it wasn't. Most of it lived in that space where companies know good and well their people can't afford a lawyer." The man lowered his eyes. "One night Lewis got dizzy over by the dish pit. Sat himself down on a crate for a minute. Manager told him to stand up or clock out. Marcus was watching his mother's face. She almost never talked about the restaurant. She'd told him only that the job had ended. "I told the manager Lewis needed to rest," she said. "He told me I wasn't authorized to adjust the schedule, so I called in another girl to cover the last hour. That sounds reasonable. It cost the restaurant $32 in extra labor." The man's jaw tightened. "They fired you over $32? "No, they fired me because I wrote it up. I put together Lewis's schedule, the missed breaks, the manager's text messages, sent the whole thing to the regional office." "And what did the regional office do?" "Sent somebody to investigate." Her voice dropped. The investigator met privately with the manager. 2 days later, Lewis's hours got cut down until he couldn't afford to stay. A week after that, I was told I'd violated procedure, damaged team trust, and exposed the company to unnecessary risk. What happened to the evidence? "I kept copies." The man looked up. "You still have them?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because someday Marcus is going to ask me why we lost our apartment, why I sold my wedding ring, why I started working 2 jobs, and when he asks, I want him to know I didn't lose it all because I was dishonest, and I didn't lose it because I was lazy." Marcus's eyes went bright, but he turned his head away. Angela reached across the table and put her hand over his. "I want him to know I lost that job because I wouldn't stand there and watch a good man get treated like his age had erased everything he was worth." The stranger didn't speak for a while. When he did, it came out just above a whisper. "What happened to Lewis?" "Moved in with his daughter up in Kentucky. Earl calls him every Sunday." Earl nodded. "He misses working. Folks think old men work because they need the money. Lewis needed the money. He also needed to feel useful, and there's not a program in this country that covers that." The stranger stared down into his cup. "I know that feeling." Outside, the wind came up harder. Angela looked at the clock over the pie case. Nearly 10:30. "You can't be out there tonight," she said. "I will be all right." "No, you won't." She took her coat off the hook beside the door. Dark green wool, old but warm. Ruth Carter had bought it for her daughter on her 25th birthday and had probably saved for it since spring. Angela held it out. The man shook his head. "I cannot take that. You can bring it back sometime. You may never see me again. Then give it to somebody else who needs it." "Angela," Earl said quietly, "you need that coat." "I've got a sweater. You walk 4 blocks. I've walked farther." The stranger looked at the coat and then at her face. "Why are you helping me?" The question wasn't suspicious. It sounded almost like a man asking for directions. Angela thought about her mother. Ruth Carter never had much. She worked as a home health aide, cooked for sick neighbors, kept spare blankets folded in the trunk of her car from October to April. She believed kindness wasn't a feeling. She believed it was a duty, same as paying what you owe. "When I was a girl," Angela said, "my mother told me never to measure a person by what they could do for me. That is a rare lesson. She used to say, Dignity belongs to a person before they earn it, not after. The man's eyes changed. What was your mother's name? Ruth. Ruth Carter? Angela stopped. Yes. The man's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. You knew her? He looked at Marcus, then at Earl, then back at Angela. I may have. How? Before he could answer, headlights swung into the lot. A white utility van pulled up outside. Earl looked through the glass. That's Pastor Jim. Angela had called the church while the man was eating. Millbrook Community kept 2 small rooms behind the fellowship hall for travelers who needed them. Pastor Jim came through the door in work boots and a heavy jacket, bringing the cold in with him. Evening, he said. I hear somebody needs a warm place. The stranger stood up. He folded Angela's green coat over one arm. I am grateful. Angela didn't move. You were about to say something about my mother. The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his worn brown coat and took out something small and silver. It was an old-fashioned compass, no bigger than a $50, on a short chain. He put it in her hand. There were 2 letters engraved on the back. R.C. Angela's breath caught. My mother had one like this. She gave it to a man a long time ago. Why? To help him find his way home. Angela looked up fast, but the stranger had already turned toward the door. Who are you? He put on her green coat. It fit him better than it should have. Tonight, he said, I am only a man who needed to remember what kindness felt like. Then he followed Pastor Jim out into the cold. Angela stood by the door with the compass in her hand. Earl came over. You all right? I don't know. Marcus leaned in to look at the engraving. Could it really be Grandma's? Angela turned it over in her palm. Near the edge of the case there was a tiny scratch, curved like a crescent moon. Her mother's compass had the same mark. She'd been 10 years old the winter it disappeared out of Ruth's coat pocket. She had held that compass 100 times before then, turning it over on the kitchen table while her mother cooked, running her thumbnail along that little crescent. She'd asked where it went. Ruth only said it had found better work. Angela had asked her once how the scratch got there. Ruth smiled and said, Somewhere I was meant to be. She never explained it any further than that. That night, Angela and Marcus walked home under a sky with no stars in it. Angela wore 2 sweaters, and the cold went through both. Marcus carried his backpack and the empty paper sack. Neither one of them mentioned being hungry. When they got to the little rental house, Angela checked the mailbox on the porch. Another notice from the landlord. She didn't open it. She slid it under a stack of grocery flyers and locked the door behind her. The house had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a furnace that knocked like a man at the door every time it came on. The kitchen floor tilted slightly toward the back wall. Rain came in over the sink window when the storms blew from the west. Still, Angela had made it a home. There were photographs on the walls. Marcus's certificates were taped to the refrigerator. 4 years' worth. Ruth's hand-sewn quilt lay folded over the arm of the couch. Before bed, Angela opened the wooden box she kept in the top drawer of her dresser. Inside were photographs, letters, David's wedding band, and a folded piece of newspaper gone soft as cloth. The article was 29 years old. Local woman aids businessman, after winter accident. Angela had found it among her mother's things after Ruth died. The article didn't name the businessman. It said the family had asked for privacy. It said only that Ruth Carter, a home health aide driving back from a night shift, had come across an overturned car near the Harrow Creek Bridge during an ice storm. Ruth broke a window with a tire iron, got the driver out, and stayed with him on the shoulder of the road until the ambulance came. The man later offered her a reward. Ruth turned it down. Angela had always figured he was somebody moderately successful. A lawyer, the owner of a lumber yard maybe. She had never once connected that story to the name Whitmore. She laid the silver compass down beside the clipping. Marcus appeared in the doorway. You think Sam's the man Grandma pulled out of that car? I don't know. He knew her name. He did. And he's got her compass. He does. Marcus leaned against the doorframe. Maybe he's rich. Angela looked at his serious face. What makes you say that? The way he talks. Rich men don't generally sleep in church back rooms, baby. Maybe he wasn't really homeless. Angela thought about his clear eyes, his careful questions, that strange sadness in his voice when he talked about the restaurant chain. Get some sleep. Are we going to be okay? It came out quiet. Angela put the compass back in the box. We've always been okay. That's not what I asked. She looked at her son. For a second, she saw David in him so plain it took the air out of her. Marcus came and sat on the edge of the bed. I heard Mr. Landry talking to you yesterday, he said. He said we've got till Friday. Angela swallowed. I'm working on it. I can drop the school trip. No. It's $80. You're going. I don't need to see Washington. You've talked about that trip since September. I can look at pictures. Angela took his face gently between both hands. Listen to me. You are not responsible for the rent. You are not responsible for the groceries. And you are not responsible for fixing what grown people broke. But I can help. You already help. You study. You tell the truth. You show people kindness, even when life hands you every reason not to. That's your work right now. And don't you take on anybody else's. Marcus nodded, though she could see plain enough he wasn't convinced. After he went to bed, Angela sat alone at the kitchen table. She opened the landlord's letter. $1,240. She had $318 in the bank. Her next check would cover part of it and no more. Come Friday, she and her boy might not have a door to lock. Angela put her head in her hands. She gave herself 5 minutes to be afraid. Then she folded the letter, put it in her purse, and made Marcus's lunch for the morning. At 6:17, the sedans came. The sound of car doors woke half the street. Marcus got to the window first. Angela came up behind him, tying her robe. When Samuel Whitmore stepped out of the third car, she knew his eyes before she knew anything else. The beard was trimmed now. The dirt was gone. The torn coat had been traded for a suit that cost more than her car, but he still had her green coat over his shoulders. It was a little small on him. A younger man came up the walk first, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed for a courtroom. Ms. Angela Carter? Yes. My name is Daniel Brooks. I serve as chief counsel for Whitmore Hospitality Group, the parent company. The restaurants carry the family name. He paused. Mr. Whitmore would like to speak with you. Angela looked past him. The old man stood by the gate, holding the silver compass. Told you he was rich, Marcus whispered. Angela opened the door but stayed behind the threshold. Samuel came up the walk alone. Good morning, he said. You lied to us. Yes? You're not homeless. No. You let my 13-year-old boy believe you had nowhere to go. Samuel lowered his head. That was wrong. Why'd you do it? I wanted to know how people are treated when nobody believes they matter. So you tested us. I tested my company. You came into Earl's Diner. Because every restaurant carrying my family's name had already turned me away. I rode the last bus into town. It does not come back until morning. Angela folded her arms against the cold. And now you show up with 3 cars and a lawyer. I asked them to stay out of the conversation. They're standing in my yard. Samuel glanced back. Daniel immediately waved the others toward the street. Samuel took the green coat off his shoulders. I came to return this. She took it. It had been cleaned and pressed. A button that had been hanging by a thread was sewn on new. Inside one pocket, she felt something square. She pulled out an envelope. Her face changed. What's this? A check. She handed it straight back without opening it. No. Angela. No. It is not charity. It came in an envelope before you even asked me what I needed. That makes it charity. It is repayment. For the meal and for the coat. A plate of meatloaf doesn't require a check. Samuel looked at the envelope in his hand. It is also an apology. An apology is spoken out loud. He slowly put the envelope inside his own coat. You are right. Angela waited. Samuel seemed unaccustomed to talking without something standing behind him. For the first time that morning, he looked like the man from the diner again. I am sorry, he said. I should not have come into your life under false circumstances. I told myself the disguise was necessary, because people behave differently around the man whose name is on the sign. That may be true, but necessity does not undo the effect of a lie. Angela's anger eased a little. She didn't step out of the doorway. How did you find my house? Pastor Jim keeps a register for the guest rooms, Samuel said. Your name is in it. You signed for the room I slept in. Angela said nothing for a moment. Why did you ask about my mother? Samuel looked down at the compass. Because 29 years ago, Ruth Carter saved my life. Marcus came up beside his mother. Samuel went on. I was 43 years old. Whitmore Family Restaurants had 12 locations. I believed success meant moving faster than everyone around me. I worked 7 days a week. I missed family suppers. I missed school plays. I believed every one of those sacrifices would be forgiven once the company got large enough. His eyes drifted down the quiet street. One night, during an ice storm, I insisted on driving from Louisville to Nashville for a meeting that could have waited a week. My car left the road near Harrow Creek. It hit a barrier and rolled. Angela thought of the clipping in the wooden box. Your mother found me, Samuel said. The engine had begun to burn. She broke the passenger window with a tire iron and pulled me out through the opening. Mama wasn't very big. No, she was not. A faint smile crossed his face. But she was determined. He turned the compass over in his fingers. I was frightened and confused. Your mother sat down beside me in the snow and kept me talking. She asked about my family. I told her I had a wife and a 12-year-old son. Preston, Angela said. Yes. Samuel nodded. She took this compass out of her coat and put it in my hand. She said, a man can build 100 roads and still forget which one leads home. Angela closed her eyes for a second. That was Ruth all the way down. When the ambulance came, Samuel said, your mother left before I could thank her properly. I found her later through the hospital. I offered her money. She refused. I offered to buy her a house. She refused that too. She would. I asked what I could do. What'd she say? She told me to go home and eat supper with my son. Samuel's voice went thin. I did, for a while. Angela looked at the cars, and the lawyer, and the old man holding her mother's compass in a cold front yard. What happened? The company grew. I told myself I was building it for my family. The truth is that I was hiding inside my work, because numbers were easier than people. My wife passed 12 years ago. Preston eventually became chief executive. I stayed on as chairman, but I stopped asking hard questions. You let him run it? Yes. Did you know what was happening to the people who worked for you? No. That's not the same thing as it not being your responsibility. Samuel met her eyes. No, it is not. Marcus looked from his mother to the old man. How'd you find us, though? Really? Samuel turned toward him. I did not come here looking for you, son. Somebody mailed me copies of employee complaints from several restaurants. Your grandmother's name is in an old newspaper article I keep folded with this compass. When your mother told me her name last night, I began to wonder. Who sent the complaints? Angela asked. We are still working on that. Samuel paused. But one of the documents was your original report about Lewis Grant. Angela's face changed. That report was supposed to be destroyed. So it appears. Who has it? My office received a copy 3 weeks ago. And you waited 3 weeks? I was recovering from surgery. Angela felt a flicker of concern before she could stop it. Samuel noticed. It was not serious, he said. But while I was laid up, I read reports I had been ignoring for years. Turnover had doubled. Complaints about missed breaks, unstable schedules, and unfair dismissals had climbed across the whole company. Did Preston know? He received the same reports. Then why didn't anything change? That is one of the questions I intend to ask him. A dark blue car turned onto Willow Street, moving faster than the others had. It stopped behind the sedans, and a man got out before his driver could come around. Angela recognized him. Samuel Whitmore hadn't appeared in public since his wife's funeral, but Preston Whitmore's face was on a magazine cover beside every supermarket register in the county. He was in his early 40s, with his father's height and none of his father's stillness. Dark hair going gray at the temples. His expression was controlled, but there was anger sitting in the corners of his mouth. He walked straight at Samuel. "What are you doing here?" Samuel turned. "I told you not to come." "You disappeared. Security has been searching 3 counties. I left a message. You left your phone on the desk and a note that said you needed the truth. I found part of it." Preston glanced at Angela. "Who is this?" Samuel's voice went cold. "This is Angela Carter. She worked at our Franklin location." Preston looked at her more carefully. "I know that name." Angela felt the heat come up in her chest. "Do you? You filed a complaint. I filed evidence." Preston turned back to his father. "This is exactly what I warned you about. Former employees hear you're reviewing old cases, and suddenly every one of them has a story." Samuel stepped closer to his son. "She gave me her supper when she believed I had nothing." Preston blinked. What? "I spent yesterday visiting our restaurants dressed as a man without money." "You did what?" 3 locations refused to seat me. Because managers are trained to protect customers and staff. From a cold old man asking to sit near a heater? Preston lowered his voice. "This is not a conversation for somebody's front yard." It became a conversation for this front yard when our decisions nearly put the woman who lives here out on the street. Angela straightened. "You don't need to discuss my rent." Samuel turned to her at once. "I apologize." Preston took the opening. "You see, you don't know the first thing about her life. I know our company dismissed her for protecting an elderly employee. She violated procedure." "Which procedure?" "The matter was reviewed." "By whom?" "Regional operations." "Name the person." Preston hesitated. Angela answered for him. "Charles Vance." Preston's eyes moved to her. "Vance left the company last year. After a promotion and a retirement package. That has nothing to do with your case. It has everything to do with my case. He's the regional director who told managers to bring labor costs down by any method that didn't create immediate legal exposure." "That's an accusation." "It's an email." Preston's face went very still. "I printed it," Angela said, "before they closed my employee account." Samuel turned toward the attorney waiting by the cars. "Daniel, did the complaint file include that email?" Daniel came forward. "Yes, sir." Preston looked at him sharply. "You reviewed private company records without notifying me?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I reviewed materials sent directly to the chairman alleging misconduct. I am the chief executive, and Mr. Whitmore remains chairman." Samuel raised one hand. "This will not be settled by titles." Preston stepped back and breathed out slowly. Angela watched him. She had pictured this moment 100 times. In every version she'd made a perfect speech. She laid every lie out on the table. She left him with nothing to say. Standing there in her robe in her own front yard, she didn't feel any of what she thought she'd feel. What she saw was a man who had spent so many years defending a system that he'd lost track of where he ended and the system started. That didn't excuse him. But it changed the shape of her anger. Samuel turned to her. "I would like to review everything you kept." "Why?" "Because I need to know what happened." "You already know what happened." "I know what happened to you. I need to know how far it spread." "And after you know?" "We correct it." Angela shook her head. "Companies always say that right after somebody important gets embarrassed." "This is not about embarrassment." "Then why are the cars here? Why's your lawyer here? Why did your son drive out before breakfast?" She pulled her robe tighter. "Because the story finally reached somebody with power, that's why." Samuel took it without defending himself. "Yes." Angela stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind her, so Marcus wouldn't feel exposed. "Lewis told the truth 2 years ago," she said. "I told the truth. Other people told the truth. Not one of us got any more truthful because you finally decided to listen. No. The difference isn't the evidence. No. The difference is that now the evidence reached you." Samuel nodded. "Yes?" Angela looked at Preston. "And what happens if fixing it costs more than ignoring it?" Preston answered before his father could. We operate more than 800 restaurants. Decisions can't be made from emotion. Angela turned to face him. You're right. That surprised him. A company that size can't run on emotion, she said. It also can't survive without a conscience. We employ nearly 30,000 people. Then nearly 30,000 people are depending on you to remember they're human beings. You don't understand the financial pressure involved. I understand pressure. She pointed back at the house. I understand choosing between the rent and the power bill. I understand telling my son I already ate so he'll finish what's on his plate. I understand working 16 hours and still getting a letter that says it isn't enough. Preston looked away. That pressure started the day your company fired me for standing up for a man who gave it 15 years of his life. Samuel's face filled with something close to grief. Angela didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. You talk about labor like it's fuel, she said. Something you burn careful so the machine keeps turning. But every number in those reports belongs to somebody who goes home tired. Somebody with a mother. Somebody with a child. Somebody who spent years believing that loyalty would get remembered. Preston looked at his father. This is getting theatrical. Samuel's voice was quiet. No, it is getting honest. A curtain moved in the house across the street. Angela noticed the neighbors watching and lowered her voice. I'll show you the records, but not here, and not because I want money. What do you want? Samuel asked. I want Lewis Grant's case reopened. It will be. I want every employee dismissed under that same regional policy reviewed. Yes. I want workers in the room for whatever comes next. Yes. And I want you to quit talking about helping like I'm the whole problem. I'm one person. There are folks who lost a lot more than I did. Samuel glanced at his son. Agreed. Preston said nothing at all. Angela opened her door. Give me 20 minutes to get dressed. We'll meet at Earl's. Samuel nodded. We will wait here. No. He looked puzzled. Take the cars away. You're scaring the whole neighborhood. For the first time that morning, Marcus laughed out loud behind the screen door. Samuel almost smiled. He turned to Daniel. You heard her. Within minutes, 2 of the sedans pulled out. Samuel waited in the third with Preston and Daniel. Angela shut the door and leaned back against it. Marcus stood in the hallway. That was Samuel Whitmore. Yes, he owns hotels and restaurants. He does. He's probably got more money than everybody in Millbrook put together. Probably. Marcus looked out the window. So am I still going to school? Angela stared at him. He grinned. Figured I'd ask. 25 minutes later, Angela walked into the Bluebird Diner in black slacks, a cream blouse, and her mother's green coat. Earl had opened early. He stood behind the counter watching Samuel Whitmore sit in the same booth he'd occupied the night before. Preston sat across from his father. Daniel Brooks had folders spread over the table. Nadine, the morning cook, kept finding reasons to walk past that booth with a rag in her hand. Angela came in carrying a cardboard file box. Samuel stood when she reached the table. Preston stayed seated until his father looked at him. Then he stood too. Angela set the box down. These are the records I kept. Daniel opened the first folder. Inside were printed schedules, payroll summaries, emails, handwritten statements, copies of internal complaints, all of it ordered by date in a woman's careful handwriting. You documented all of this? He asked. I figured somebody would care eventually. Daniel read in silence for several minutes. Samuel watched his face. What do you see? A pattern. Preston leaned forward. What kind of pattern? Labor budgets cut below the levels the board approved. Schedule changes issued without required notice. Employees over 60 assigned a disproportionate share of closing shifts. Complaints routed to regional managers instead of human resources. That could reflect individual failures of local management. Daniel lifted another page. There is an email here from Charles Vance instructing managers to make certain workers choose to leave voluntarily, so the company could avoid severance and unemployment claims. Preston took the page. His eyes moved across it twice. I never approved this language. Angela looked at him. Did you approve the targets? Preston didn't answer. Samuel's gaze settled on his son. Did you? I approved efficiency goals. Did you ask how they were being met? I expected regional leadership to follow the law. That was not my question. Preston set the email down on the table. No, I did not ask. The admission changed the whole room. For the first time, he didn't sound like a chief executive defending a company. He sounded like a son answering his father. Samuel sat back. When I handed you this company, I told you to protect what our name meant. You told me the company was losing ground. It was. You told me thousands of jobs depended on making hard choices. They did. You praised the first quarter after I brought costs down. Samuel's expression shifted. You called me from Europe, Preston said, and told me I'd done what you were too sentimental to do. Samuel closed his eyes. Angela watched both men. Whatever was happening between them was older than the paper on that table, older, most likely, than the company itself. Samuel opened his eyes. I said that. You rewarded the results. I did. And now you stand in a diner and act like this belongs to me alone. Samuel looked down at his hands, which were spotted and thin, and had built 800 buildings. No, he said. It does not belong to you alone. Preston's anger went out of him all at once. I spent my whole life trying to prove I could carry what you built. And I spent your whole life teaching you that carrying it mattered more than knowing where it ought to go. The diner went quiet except for the hum of the cooler. Samuel looked over at Angela. Your mother told me to go home to my son. I went home for one supper. Then I went back to work the next morning and convinced myself one supper was enough. Preston stared out the window. You were never there. I know. You showed up for photographs. I know. You gave speeches about family, while mine sat at a table with an empty chair at the head of it. Samuel's face tightened. I know. Preston laughed once, with nothing in it. No, you know now. Earl came over with a fresh pot and filled all 4 cups without a word. Then he looked at Preston. My daddy ran a grocery, Earl said. Worked from before sunup till after dark, 6 days a week, 41 years. Folks in this town called him dependable. Preston looked up at him. At home, Earl said, we called him absent. He shrugged. Both things were true. That's the part nobody tells you. He went back to the counter. By 10 o'clock, Samuel had called an emergency meeting of the Whitmore Hospitality Board. By 11, an independent employment law firm had been retained to examine 5 years of complaints, dismissals, and scheduling practices. By noon, Charles Vance's retirement payments had been frozen pending investigation. None of it impressed Angela. She'd seen companies announce reviews before. Reviews make headlines. Justice takes decisions. Samuel asked her to stay at the diner while he joined the board meeting by video. Angela shook her head. I've got a shift at the motor lodge. You can't be serious, Preston said. I miss work, I lose pay. That's how it's always worked for me. Samuel reached for his wallet and then stopped himself. He remembered the envelope. Would Earl allow you to use his back office while we arrange compensation for your time? Angela looked at Earl. He nodded. I can handle the lunch rush. This isn't your responsibility. Neither was feeding half this town during the flood of '86. Did that too. Angela gave in. The board meeting ran 3 hours. She did not sit there as a silent witness. She spoke. When one board member described the violations as isolated failures of local management, Angela read the dates of 12 complaints that had been sent directly to corporate. When another warned that reopening old cases could create significant financial exposure, Angela asked whether anybody had measured the exposure the employees had already absorbed. When a lawyer counseled caution, Angela said that caution had protected the company for years and had protected the workers not one single day. She stayed calm the whole time. That made her harder to dismiss. Samuel listened. Preston argued sometimes, questioned sometimes, and sat quiet the rest. At the end of it, the board approved a temporary suspension of several regional executives and authorized a complete review of employee complaints going back 5 years. They also asked Preston to step aside from daily operations until the investigation concluded. The measure carried by 1 vote. Samuel cast it. Preston closed his laptop. He didn't look at his father. I assume you're satisfied. Samuel's voice was heavy. No. You removed your own son as chief executive. I suspended a chief executive who failed to protect his people. And the father? The father failed a long time before today. Preston stood up, and Angela expected him to walk out. Instead, he went to the diner window and stayed there. Outside, an old man in a denim jacket was crossing Main Street slowly with a sack of groceries in both arms. Preston watched him reach the far sidewalk. Then he spoke without turning around. When I was 17, I worked at the first Whitmore restaurant over summer break. Samuel looked up, surprised. I remember. No, you don't. Preston turned. You came once. You shook my hand in front of the staff and said, "Hard work builds character." Then you got back in the car. Samuel said nothing. There was a dishwasher named Anthony. Preston went on. 70 years old. He taught me how to clean the industrial mixer without wrecking the seals. He packed an extra sandwich every night, because he'd decided my father wasn't feeding me enough. A small smile appeared and left again. One evening, Anthony dropped a plate. The manager took it out of his pay. I told him that wasn't right, and Anthony grabbed my arm and begged me not to say anything, because he needed the job. Preston looked over at the documents on the table. I remember thinking that when I ran this company, men like Anthony would be safe. What happened? Angela asked. Preston lowered his eyes. I started seeing payroll instead of names. Nobody answered that. He picked up his coat. I need some air. Samuel started to rise. Preston held up one hand. Not yet. He left the diner alone. Angela watched him walk down Main Street with his hands in his pockets. Do you think he'll come back? Samuel asked. He came here, Angela said. That's more than he had to do. Samuel studied her. You are generous toward a man whose decisions hurt you. I didn't say I forgive him. What are you saying? That a person can be responsible for harm and still not be past repair. Those are two different questions. Samuel looked toward the door his son had gone through. Your mother believed that. She believed people had to tell the truth before any repair could start. Daniel closed the last folder. There is enough here to justify a much wider review. Angela put her hand flat on the box. This is one restaurant. We have received similar records from 23 locations. Who sent them? Daniel looked at Samuel. Samuel nodded. A woman named Evelyn Price, Daniel said. Angela knew that name. Evelyn had worked in payroll at the regional office. Quiet, precise, close to retirement. The kind of woman who kept her desk clean and her opinions to herself. Angela had handed her copies of everything a week before she was dismissed. I thought she was afraid to help. She was, Daniel said, for 2 years. What changed? She retired last month. Then, she mailed all of it. Angela sat back in the booth. Evelyn hadn't forgotten. Something warm moved through her. Sometimes courage shows up late. That doesn't make it worth nothing. At 4 o'clock, Angela left for her shift at the motor lodge. Samuel offered her a ride. She turned it down. So he walked with her instead. The wind had eased off, but the air still had teeth in it. Samuel wore an overcoat Daniel had brought from the car. Angela wore her mother's green one. They passed the pharmacy, the library, and the empty building where a furniture store had been for 30 years. Samuel moved slowly. Angela adjusted her pace without mentioning it. After a block, he said, "You never opened the check." "No. It was for $50,000. Angela stopped walking. Samuel stopped beside her. "You put $50,000 in my coat pocket." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I knew the company had done you financial harm." "You knew that after one conversation?" "I knew enough. You thought money would make the conversation easier." Samuel thought about it honestly before he answered. "Yes. It would have made it easier for you." "You?" "Yes." They started walking again. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you I don't need money," Angela said. "I need it worse than I'd care to say out loud." "Then why refuse it?" because taking it before the truth came out would have made me feel bought. That was not my intention. Intentions are usually kinder than consequences. Samuel nodded. Another lesson taken without argument. They reached the Willow Creek Motor Lodge. 2 stories, faded doors, a vacancy sign with 1 letter flickering. Angela stopped near the office. "I can't promise the board will do everything you asked for," Samuel said. "Then don't promise." "I can promise the investigation will not be buried. That promise belongs to the workers, not to me." "I understand." She turned toward the office door. "Angela." She looked back. Samuel held out the compass. "This belongs to your family." She looked at it and didn't take it. "My mother gave it to you. She gave it to a man who needed direction. Do you still need it?" He looked back toward Main Street, where his son had disappeared hours before. "Yes." "Then keep it," she said, "until you find your way home." Samuel's eyes changed. Angela went inside before he could answer. That evening, word of the Whitmore investigation reached the national press. A business reporter noticed unusual board activity. By sundown, television stations were discussing management changes at one of the largest privately held hospitality companies in the country. Angela's name was not released. She was grateful for that. She didn't want cameras on her porch. She didn't want strangers turning the worst 2 years of her life into something people watched while they ate. At 8:30, while she was changing sheets in room 26, her phone rang. "Earl, Lewis is on the line," he said. "Hold on." Angela sat down on the edge of the bed. A familiar voice came through. "Angela?" "Mr. Grant." Lewis laughed softly. "You still call me that, after all this. Some habits stick. Earl told me what happened. Not much has happened yet. They reopened my case." "Yes. I thought nobody remembered." "I remembered. I know you did." His voice shook. "I wanted to thank you. You thanked me 2 years ago." "No, ma'am. 2 years ago I thanked you for standing up for me. Tonight I'm thanking you for carrying the truth around while the rest of us were too worn out to lift it." Angela looked around the empty motel room. "You weren't weak, Lewis." "Felt weak." "You were tired. Sometimes those feel like the same thing." She closed her eyes. "My daughter says the company might owe me back pay," he said. "That's possible. I don't know what to do with that." "Wait until they make a real offer, then talk to a lawyer." He chuckled. "You always were practical." "Somebody's got to be." There was a pause. "Angela, Earl told me about your house." Her eyes opened. "What did Earl say?" "That you might lose it. I told him not to discuss my business." "Don't be hard on him. He worries." "I'll manage." "You always say that." "So does everybody, these days." Lewis's voice firmed up. "I've got some savings." "No. You haven't heard the amount." "No. You helped me. And I'd do it again tomorrow." "That doesn't mean you owe me your savings." "What if I want to?" "Then wait. If that company pays what it owes you, you use it to take care of yourself. I've got my daughter. And Marcus has me." Lewis sighed. "Your mother was stubborn too. So I've heard." When Angela got home near midnight, there was a familiar truck at the curb. Earl was sitting on her porch steps in the dark. "You told Lewis about the rent." "I did. I asked you not to. You asked me not to embarrass you. That's the same thing." "No, it isn't." He got to his feet, slower than he used to. "I've known you since the day you were born. I watched your mother give away food she needed. I watched you do the exact same thing last night in my own building. But somewhere along the way you decided that taking help would make you less than you are." Angela crossed her arms against the cold. "I've accepted plenty of help. You accept what you can pay back. That's called being responsible. That's called control." The word landed. Earl went on, gentler. "Giving lets you stay the strong one. Receiving asks you to trust somebody else with your dignity. That's the harder job. And you've been ducking it since you were 19 years old." Angela looked off down the street. "I don't want to be one more person somebody has to carry. Then quit acting like love is a burden." She blinked hard. Earl held out an envelope. "If you tell me this is charity, I'm going to get ornery. What is it? A loan. Enough for the rent. You pay me back $20 a week once the company settles your case. I can't tell you when that'll be. Then you pay me back after Marcus graduates college. Earl. Angela. She looked at the envelope in his hand. Her own hand started shaking. For 2 years, she had held everything together by refusing to let herself imagine what would happen if she ever let go of any of it. Now, standing under a weak porch light in a coat her mother bought her, she let somebody else hold one corner. She took the envelope. 20 a week, she said. 10. You said 20. I changed my mind. 15. Done. Earl put his arms around her. Angela rested her forehead on his shoulder and cried without making a sound. Inside the house, Marcus watched from the window. He had the good sense not to open the door. The investigation ran 11 weeks. In that time, the story got bigger than Angela, bigger than Samuel, bigger than one restaurant in Franklin. Investigators interviewed more than 600 current and former employees. They went through schedules, payroll records, internal email, and 5 years of regional performance reports. What they found was hard to read. Plenty of managers had acted honorably, some of them under real pressure. Others had used the schedule as a tool, moving hours around until older employees, single parents, and workers with medical limitations gave up and resigned on their own. Some complaints had been ignored. Others had been quietly edited before they ever reached headquarters. The behavior wasn't universal, but it was not isolated either. It had grown out of a culture that learned to reward lower costs without ever asking what those savings actually required from human beings. And because the harm was ordinary, a shift here, an hour there, a form that got filed in the wrong drawer, it had been easy for everybody to look past. Preston stayed suspended the whole time. For the first 3 weeks, he communicated with his father only through attorneys. Then, on a rainy afternoon in March, he came back to the Bluebird Diner. Alone. Angela was behind the counter. Preston sat down in the booth by the heater, the same booth where his father had eaten her supper. She poured coffee and set it in front of him. You here to apologize? No. Then the coffee's $2. He almost smiled. I came to listen. To who? To you. I already told you what happened. You told me what the company did. I want to understand what it changed. Angela glanced at Earl. He nodded and took the counter. She sat down across from Preston. He looked worn out, not the ordinary tiredness of a missed night's sleep, but the deeper kind that comes when a man's understanding of himself starts coming apart in his hands. What do you want to know? What happened after you were dismissed? Angela thought about refusing. Then she remembered what she'd told Samuel. Truth comes before repair. I lost the apartment 4 months later, she said. I had savings. My husband's medical bills had already taken most of it. Where did you go? My mother was still living. Marcus and I moved in with her. How old was he? 11. Preston looked down at the table. I applied everywhere, Angela said. 2 places called my old manager for a reference. After that, the interviews stopped coming. Retaliation. Yes. Why didn't you sue? With what money? There are employment attorneys who work on contingency. There are also about 10,000 workers looking for those attorneys. My documents showed unfairness. Proving something illegal would have taken years I didn't have. Preston put both hands around the coffee cup. What happened to your mother? Died 8 months later. I'm sorry. Angela nodded. Her heart. I was working nights when Earl called me. By the time I got to the hospital, she was already gone. Preston looked out at the rain. I was in Singapore when my mother died. Angela had not expected that. She'd been sick a long while, he said. We knew it was close. I had a meeting with investors. He paused. My father told me to stay. Angela sat with that a moment. Samuel Whitmore, the man Ruth Carter pulled out of a burning car, the man she'd told to go home to his son, had later told that same son to stay at work while his mother was dying. She thought about how easily people pass along the very wound they once swore to heal. Do you regret it? She asked. Every day of my life. Then why did you build a company that made your people choose between the job and the family? His face tightened. I told myself the company had to stay strong. For who? I don't know anymore. Angela leaned back. Your father came into this town dressed as a man nobody wanted to look at. Maybe you need to do something like that. You think I should pretend to be homeless? No. I think you should go be somebody who listens before he says his last name. Over the next month, Preston Whitmore visited 14 restaurants. No cameras, no assistants, no advance notice. He washed dishes in Memphis. He poured coffee in Lexington. He spent an entire evening beside a father of two who worked 2 jobs and slept in his car between shifts because driving home and back cost more in gas than the sleep was worth. He sat with a 63-year-old cook whose hours had been cut after she asked for Sundays off to care for her husband. He listened to a 29-year-old manager explain, almost apologetically, that his bonus depended on labor targets no honest person could hit without leaving the kitchen short. Not every story condemned him. Some employees were proud of the company. Some had been carried through an illness or a funeral by managers who bent every rule to do it. Some supervisors had protected their crews for years under pressure from above. That made the truth harder, not easier. Whitmore was not an evil company full of cruel people. It was a company built by ordinary people who had gradually learned to value what could be counted over what could only be felt. And because the harm was ordinary, it had been simple to ignore. During those weeks, Samuel stayed in Millbrook. He took a room at the Willow Creek Motor Lodge. The owner offered him the largest suite in the building. Samuel chose room 11, one of the oldest, looking out over the parking lot and the dumpster, and a stand of bare trees behind it. Every morning he walked to the Bluebird. He didn't take a private booth. He sat at the counter with farmers and retired school teachers and delivery drivers, and a mechanic named Cordell, who had opinions about everything. At first, people treated him like a famous visitor. After a couple of weeks, they treated him like Sam. He listened a great deal more than he talked. Marcus sometimes joined him before school. Samuel helped with history homework and told stories about opening his first restaurant with 4 tables and a second-hand stove he'd hauled in the bed of a borrowed truck. Marcus asked the questions grown people are too polite to ask. Why do rich people keep working after they've got enough? Samuel considered it. Because enough is not a number. What is it? A decision. Did you ever make it? No. Why not? Samuel turned his coffee cup a half-turn on the counter. Because I was afraid that if I stopped building, I would find out I did not know who I was without the company. Marcus thought that over. My mom knows who she is. Yes, Samuel said. She does. Do you? Samuel looked down at Ruth's compass. I am learning. Angela stayed cautious. She appreciated what Samuel was doing. She did not mistake presence for transformation. A man can spend a season in a small town and go right back to a life where every door opens before he reaches it. Real change gets measured after the attention goes away. One morning, he found her near the kitchen door. The board will release the investigation results next week, he said. All of them? The legal team recommends a summary. What do you recommend? The complete findings, with employee names protected. Angela nodded. And Preston? The board will decide whether he returns. What do you think? Samuel looked through the pass-through window, where Earl was teaching Marcus how to cut biscuit dough without twisting the cutter. I think my son made serious mistakes. He did. I also think he has spent the last month doing something I failed to do for 30 years. What's that? Listening without being in control of the room. Angela wiped her hands on a towel. Forgiveness and employment are 2 different questions. Samuel smiled faintly. You have a way of making things clear. Life's confusing enough without people helping. He got serious. The board would like you to attend the meeting. Why? They want to hear what you believe should happen next. I already gave you my list. They are considering creating an office of employee advocacy. Angela waited. They would like you to lead it, Samuel said. She laughed once. No. You have not heard the details. I don't need the details. You would report directly to the board. I pour coffee and clean motel rooms. You also preserved evidence for 2 years, defended a colleague at the cost of your job, stood in front of a board of directors, and made us see what our own reports were hiding. I don't have a college degree. Neither did I when I founded the company. You had money. I had $4,000 and a loan from my brother. You also had the freedom to fail. I've got a son. The position would provide stability. That's exactly why I don't trust my own answer. Samuel looked puzzled. Angela lowered her voice. If I say yes because I'm scared of losing my house, then I'll spend the rest of my life wondering whether you hired me because I was useful or because I was desperate. I would never use your situation that way. You put $50,000 in my coat pocket. He took the reminder without flinching. What would allow you to consider it? An open hiring process. Agreed. Other candidates, real ones. Agreed. A written charter protecting the office from executive interference. Agreed. A worker advisory council, elected by employees, not appointed. Samuel hesitated only a second. Agreed. And Lewis Grant gets a seat on it. Something like humor came into Samuel's eyes. I believe he would enjoy that. Angela shook her head. He'll complain about every single meeting. Then the meetings may improve. The board released the investigation on a Monday morning. The report acknowledged systemic failures in scheduling, complaint handling, and performance incentives. Whitmore Hospitality agreed to pay back wages and compensation to affected employees, subject to independent review. It restored positions where positions could be restored. It funded retirement contributions that had been lost. It created predictable scheduling standards, protected medical and family leave, and set up a confidential reporting line that bypassed regional management entirely. The total cost came to more than $180 million. Several minority investors objected, loudly and in writing. Samuel answered them in public. A company that cannot afford dignity, he said, cannot afford to carry my family's name. The line ran in newspapers from Nashville to New York. But the announcement that mattered most to Angela came in a plain envelope from the Independent Review Board. Her dismissal had been ruled retaliatory and unjust. She was awarded back pay, lost benefits, and compensation for documented hardship. It was more money than had ever been attached to her name in her life. Angela sat at her kitchen table and read the letter 3 times. Marcus stood behind her chair. Are we rich? No. Are we still poor? Angela looked at the figure again. We're safe. Marcus put his arms around her shoulders. For the first time in years, Angela let herself picture a future further out than the next bill. They could keep the house. She could fix the furnace before winter. She could cut her hours and be home before midnight. Safety didn't arrive the way joy does. It arrived like quiet. The quiet of not hearing fear in every knock at the door. 2 days later, Marcus came into the kitchen with a permission slip and set it on the table without a word. Angela read it, signed her name, and clipped 4 $20 bills to the corner. Bring me back a photograph of something old, she said. Lewis Grant received back pay and full restoration of his retirement benefits. He declined an offer to return to the dish pit. I'm 70 now, he told Angela on the phone. I have finally decided Earl might be right about old folks and sleep. He did accept a seat on the Worker Advisory Council. At the first meeting, he complained that the chairs were uncomfortable, the coffee was weak, and the agenda ran too long. Samuel told Angela afterward that it was the most useful meeting the company had held in 20 years. The board narrowed the advocacy position to 3 finalists. Angela was one. The second was a labor relations professor from Chicago. The third had been human resources director for a national retail chain. Angela went to the interview in a navy suit she bought with part of the settlement. She didn't try to talk the way they talked. When they asked about strategic frameworks, she talked about trust. When they asked about metrics, she proposed measuring how often a complaint got resolved before an employee felt forced to quit. When they asked what qualified her to advise executives, Angela answered plainly. I know what your decisions feel like after they've traveled down through every level of management and finally landed on a kitchen table, where a mother is sitting up at midnight deciding which bill not to pay. She got the job. Her first decision was to put the office in Nashville, not inside corporate headquarters in New York. Her second was to hire former restaurant workers alongside the lawyers and policy people. Her third was to require every senior executive to work one full shift in a restaurant twice a year. No announcement, no special treatment, and no leaving early. Preston Whitmore came back to the company 6 months later. Not as chief executive, the board brought in an experienced outside leader for that. Preston took a smaller role overseeing training and restaurant operations. Some people called it a humiliation. Angela didn't. A smaller title isn't always a fall. Sometimes it's the first solid ground a man has stood on in 20 years. Before he came back, he asked to meet her at the Bluebird. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Yes, you do." Her directness caught him off guard. He took a breath. "I'm sorry for dismissing your complaint without reading it. I'm sorry for rewarding leaders who treated people as costs. And I'm sorry that when the consequences reached you, I defended the system instead of asking a single question about it." Angela waited. "I can't repair all of it," he said. "No, I can't give you back the time you lost with your mother. No, I can't erase what your son watched you go through. No." He nodded slowly. "But I can tell the truth about my part in it, and I can make different decisions from here on." "Yes, you can." Angela put out her hand. Preston looked at it. "This isn't forgiveness," she said. "It's an agreement to begin." He shook her hand. "I understand." Samuel went back to New York eventually, but he returned to Millbrook often, never with 3 sedans. Usually in an old dark green pickup he bought off Earl's cousin for $1,100 and a handshake. On the first anniversary of the investigation, Samuel walked into the Bluebird diner wearing the same worn brown coat he'd used on his journey. Angela was behind the counter. "You look familiar," she said. "I have been told I have a common face. Coffee? Black. Something to eat? I am afraid I forgot my wallet." Angela set down a plate of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and cornbread. "That'll run you $50,000. Samuel laughed out loud. It was the first time she'd ever heard him laugh without something sad underneath it. Marcus, 14 now, and nearly as tall as his mother, slid onto the stool beside him. "You bring the compass?" Samuel took it out of his pocket. The silver had been polished, though the little crescent scratch was still there and always would be. "Every day. Found your way home yet?" Samuel looked around the diner, at Angela, at Earl, at Lewis Grant arguing with Cordell in the corner booth, at the whole ordinary room. "I believe I am beginning to understand what the word means." That afternoon, Samuel asked Angela to walk with him. They followed the road past Main Street to a vacant lot beside Millbrook Community Church. There was a wooden sign standing at the entrance. Ruth's Table. Community Kitchen and Training Center. Angela stopped. "What is this?" "A place for people who need a meal," Samuel said, "and a place for workers who need training, or legal guidance, or help getting back into a job." She looked at the sign a long time. "You named it after my mother." "With your permission." "You already made the sign." "The sign can be changed." Angela walked out into the field. Nothing had been built yet. Only stakes in the ground and orange string marking the shape of a building that didn't exist. "Who runs it?" "A local board, not the company." "Who pays for it?" "The Whitmore Foundation provides the initial funding. The community owns it outright." Angela turned to face him. "Why?" Samuel turned the compass over in his fingers. "Because your mother pulled one man out of a car, and then she gave him a direction he ignored for the better part of 30 years. He looked off toward the road. "And because you gave that same man your supper and your coat without knowing whether he could ever pay you back. I didn't do it for repayment." "I know. Then this can't be repayment either." "It is not." "What is it then?" "A responsibility." Angela looked at the sign again. Ruth Carter had lived nearly her whole life without recognition. She helped people quietly and believed that good work didn't require an audience. Angela wondered what her mother would make of her name up on a building. She'd probably say the letters were too big. Then she'd go straight back to the kitchen and ask whether anybody had remembered to feed the volunteers. Angela laughed, and there were tears in it. She'd want the tables by the windows. Samuel smiled. Then we will put the tables by the windows. The center opened 10 months later. There were no velvet ropes and no celebrity speeches. Earl made the cornbread. Lewis complained about the microphone. Preston poured coffee. Nadine ran the kitchen line and told 2 vice presidents where to stand. Pastor Jim said grace and kept it under 90 seconds, which everybody agreed was a personal record. Marcus gave the first tour to a group of middle schoolers. Samuel stood by the entrance and shook the hand of every single person who came through the door. Angela spoke last. She stood beneath a photograph of Ruth Carter taken a long time ago. Ruth in a plain white blouse, standing beside an old Buick, smiling like the world had never once given her a reason to go bitter. Angela looked out at the workers and families and retired school teachers and church members and business people and former employees gathered in front of her. My mother believed dignity belongs to a person before they prove anything, she said. She didn't think kindness made you weak. She thought kindness was what strength looked like when nobody was watching. Samuel lowered his head. This building exists, Angela went on, because a number of people finally decided to look at what had been in front of them the whole time. Workers are not numbers. Older people are not burdens. A person without money is not a person without value. And somebody who needs help has not given up the right to stand up straight while they take it. She looked over at Marcus. Almost 2 years ago, my son and I split our supper 3 ways with a stranger. We didn't know his name, we didn't know what he owned. We only knew he was cold and he was hungry. Her voice softened. A lot of people have asked me whether I'd have helped him if I'd known he was one of the richest men in this country. A quiet laugh moved through the room. The answer is yes. She looked toward a table near the back, where several men and women from the county shelter were sitting. Then they asked whether I'd have helped him if I'd known he could never pay me back a dime. The room went still. The answer is also yes. She stepped back from the microphone. Because kindness that depends on repayment isn't kindness. It's a transaction, and this country has never had a shortage of those. Everybody stood up. But the moment Angela remembered best didn't happen during the applause. It happened later, after the crowd thinned out and the folding chairs were stacked against the wall. A woman came in carrying a small child and leading another by the hand. She'd lost her job 6 weeks back and had been sleeping in her car at the edge of the Walmart lot. Angela found her standing just inside the door, not sure whether she was allowed to stay. "You're welcome here," Angela said. "I can't pay. I didn't ask you if you could pay." The words came back to her out of another winter night, in another room, from another woman's mouth. The woman looked down at her children. "Is there any food left?" Angela glanced toward the kitchen. There was 1 pan of meatloaf, a bowl of mashed potatoes, green beans, and half a tray of cornbread still warm under a towel. "Yes," Angela said. "There's enough." Samuel was standing across the room. Their eyes met. Neither one of them said anything. They didn't need to. Years later, people in Millbrook still told the story of the black cars that came down Willow Street. Some versions said there were 5 of them. Others said Samuel Whitmore climbed out carrying a suitcase full of cash. A few claimed Angela Carter woke up rich. Those versions all missed it. Her life did change. She bought the little house on Willow Street and put in a furnace that didn't knock. She sent Marcus to college, where he studied public policy and wrote his first paper on the hidden cost of unstable work schedules, and mailed her a copy with a note that said, "This is your fault." She became respected inside Whitmore hospitality, though she never once let respect make her comfortable. Samuel stepped down as chairman at 76. Preston eventually became chief executive again, but only after a unanimous vote that included representatives elected by employees. Under him, the company grew more slowly. It also grew steadier. Turnover dropped. Customer satisfaction climbed. People stayed because they had reason to believe their lives counted for something past the hours printed on a schedule. Samuel spent his last working years teaching young business leaders one lesson, and he taught it the same way every time. Every number has a face, he told them. If you can't see the face, you're not ready to make the decision. He kept Ruth's compass until the last board meeting he ever attended. Afterward, he drove down to Millbrook in the green pickup and put it in Angela's hand. I do not need this anymore. You sure? Yes. You found your way home? Samuel looked out toward Ruth's table, where Marcus was helping Earl carry boxes in through the kitchen door. I stopped looking for home as a place where people know my name. What is it now? A place where I remember theirs. Angela closed her fingers around the compass. That evening they all ate supper at the Bluebird. No celebration, no reporters, no expensive wine, just meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and cornbread out of the oven. Samuel paid the bill. Earl still charged him $2 for the coffee. The winter sun went down behind the fields, and the lights came on along Main Street one at a time, the way they had every evening for 60 years. Angela watched Samuel laughing with her son. She thought about the night he sat out there under that broken street lamp, dressed like a man the world had already finished with. Maybe he hadn't been pretending as much as she once believed. A man can own buildings and restaurants and hotels and more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, and still be lost. A woman can live in a small house with overdue rent and still hold something no fortune ever bought. The ability to see another person clearly. The nerve to help before asking whether the help comes back. And the understanding that dignity is not a prize handed out to the successful at the end. It's where you start. Not everybody who gives away their last meal wakes up to find a wealthy man on the porch. Most kindness comes back without any black cars at all. It comes back quiet. In a phone call from somebody who remembered. In an old man offering up his savings. In a diner owner sitting on your porch steps at midnight with an envelope in his hand. In a boy who learns what generosity is by watching his mother divide one supper into 3 plates. And sometimes kindness doesn't come back to the person who gave it. It goes on ahead, from one cold stranger to the next. From one kitchen table to another. From a mother to a daughter. From a daughter to a son. Until one plain, ordinary act becomes a road. And somewhere out along that road, a man who has been lost a long time finally finds his way home.